What if the very food you've been avoiding, the food you were told would destroy your kidneys, weaken your bones, and shorten your life, is actually the one thing standing between you and a smaller waist, stronger body, and longer life? Sounds crazy, right? I'll tell you a quick story. A 59-year-old man came into my office last year. He said, "Doctor, I quit steak, eggs, and protein shakes because everyone told me too much protein was dangerous. But since then, my belly grew bigger, my blood sugar got worse, and I feel older every single day." He thought protein was killing him. In reality, cutting it out was. And here's the truth. Millions of people over 40 are making the same mistake. They fear protein like it's poison, when in fact, it might be the most powerful medicine they're not taking. Today, we're going to bust these myths wide open. By the end of this video, you'll know exactly how protein affects your kidneys, bones, blood sugar, and even lifespan. And more importantly, you'll learn how to use it to burn belly fat, protect your health, and feel younger than you have in years. Let's begin with part 1, the protein panic. Where did all this fear come from? The protein panic. Why so many fear it. If you grew up in America over the past 50 years, chances are you've heard some version of this warning. Don't eat too much protein, it'll wreck your kidneys. It'll make your bones brittle. It might even shorten your life. Maybe you heard it from a high school nurse, your doctor, or a well-meaning family member at the dinner table. And those warnings can feel even heavier when you're over 40, already carrying the worry of belly fat, blood sugar, and the aches of aging. Many people start looking at their morning eggs or evening piece of chicken and thinking, "Am I doing myself harm with every bite?" I recently spoke with a woman in her mid-50s who had been told to cut back on protein. She stopped eating meat at lunch, replaced Greek yogurt with low-fat fruit cups, and eliminated protein smoothies altogether. At first, she thought she was doing the right thing, but within a year her waistline had ballooned, her energy was down, and her doctor actually raised concerns about pre-diabetes. "I thought protein was my enemy," she says, "but the less I ate, the worse I felt." So why does so much fear surround protein? A big part of the panic comes from the way nutrition headlines work. For decades, studies on animals or short-term lab results were blown up into scary messages for humans. A finding about protein and kidney stress in rats would turn into a headline like, "Steak might destroy your kidneys." A tiny study linking protein with calcium shifts in the body would become, "High-protein diets cause osteoporosis." People didn't get the nuance, they just got the fear. And over time, that fear became part of our cultural wisdom, something passed from generation to generation, reinforced by repetition, not solid science. It also doesn't help that protein is often associated with bodybuilders or extreme diets. Many people over 40 don't see themselves in that picture. They think, protein shakes are for gym rats in their 20s, not for someone like me. The truth, however, is that protein is not just a gym supplement. It's the building block of every muscle, bone, and enzyme in your body. It keeps you strong enough to carry groceries, play with grandkids, and recover after illness. The more profound lesson here is this. Much of the fear around protein isn't based on what happens in real people over a lifetime. It's based on outdated assumptions, cherry-picked headlines, and half-told stories. And while the myths have scared people away, the real danger is that avoiding protein can speed up muscle loss, slow metabolism, and make belly fat and chronic disease more likely. In other words, the panic has pointed us in the wrong direction. And that brings us to the following question. If so many people have been afraid of protein for so long, where did these myths start? And why did they become so powerful? Let's explore that in part 2, Came From. If you've ever wondered why protein has carried such a bad reputation for so many decades, the answer isn't simple, but it's essential. The fear didn't appear out of nowhere. It was born from early research, repeated often, sometimes misunderstood, and eventually, woven into the everyday advice that so many of us grew up hearing. In the 1960s and 70s, scientists looked closely at how protein affects the body. Some of those first studies were done in animals, or in very short human trials. Researchers noticed a temporary increase in kidney filtration after a high-protein meal, or shifts in calcium levels when protein intake rose. These were interesting findings, but they weren't proof of long-term harm. Still, when those results became newspapers, the message was simplified into scary headlines. Protein damages kidneys. Protein weakens bones. Once those ideas spread, they were almost impossible to erase. Think about how this plays out in real life. A patient sees a news article, tells their doctor, and the doctor, who also read the same headline, repeats it just to be cautious. Parents pass the advice down to their kids. By the time those kids reach adulthood, the message has become common sense. Many people over 40 can remember being told in their teens or 20s not to drink too many protein shakes because it would ruin your health. One man in his late 40s once told me that when he joined a gym in college, his father warned him, "Don't touch those powders, you'll end up with kidney disease." That one warning stuck with him for decades, even though there was never any evidence behind it. Another source of confusion came from how researchers sometimes connected dots that didn't belong together. For example, if people who ate a lot of protein also happened to consume more calories overall, they often gained weight, developed diabetes, or had worse blood pressure. Instead of realizing it was the extra calories causing the harm, some concluded that protein was the problem. It's a bit like saying people who wear raincoats always get wet, forgetting that they put on the raincoat because it was raining. And then there's the cultural picture of protein. It was marketed almost exclusively toward bodybuilders, young men chasing muscles, or extreme diet trends for years. For someone in their 50s or 60s, that image felt foreign. They didn't see protein as something for their bones, independence, or healthy aging. They saw it as a fad for young people. This gap in perception allowed the myths to grow stronger, because protein didn't feel like something older adults needed to fight for. The lesson here is powerful. Nutrition myths often survive not because they're true, but because they're simple, dramatic, and easy to remember. Fear spreads faster than facts. But just because an idea has been repeated for years doesn't make it correct. If anything, protein shows us the opposite. Sometimes the very nutrient we were warned about is the one we most desperately need as we age. So now that we understand how the myths took root, the next step is to test them against reality. Are these fears really justified? Let's start with the biggest one of all, the concern that protein damages your kidneys. That's where we'll go in part 3. Kidneys under attack? The truth revealed. Of all the fears surrounding protein, none has been repeated more often than this. Eating too much protein will damage your kidneys. It's an idea that sounds scary and has been passed around for decades. But to understand where it comes from, you first need to know a little bit about how your kidneys actually work. Your kidneys act like the body's filters. They clean your blood daily, remove waste, and keep your fluid and mineral balance in check. When you eat more protein, your kidneys filter more byproducts of protein digestion, so their workload goes up. In medical terms, this shows up as a higher filtration rate. Years ago, when scientists saw this effect, they worried that it might mean the kidneys were being stressed, and over time, that stress would lead to damage. And that's how the story began. Protein makes the kidneys work harder, so eventually it must wear them out. Here's the critical part. Decades of research have tested that theory in real people with healthy kidneys, and the damage never showed up. Yes, filtration goes up when you eat more protein, but it goes back down when protein intake decreases. It's a flexible, adaptive response. Like your heart beating faster when you walk upstairs, then slowing when you sit down. No one thinks walking upstairs will give you heart failure. And in the same way, eating more protein doesn't burn out healthy kidneys. I remember a man in his early 60s who came to see me, worried because his daughter had begged him to stop drinking protein shakes. "Dad," she said, "you're going to ruin your kidneys." He loved lifting light weights at his community gym, but was so afraid that he stopped his shakes completely. Within a few months, he noticed his strength fading, his energy dropping, and his belly creeping out. His kidney function was perfectly normal when we checked his labs, no change at all. What had changed was his muscle mass and his confidence. Once he returned to a balanced diet with adequate protein, his body and mood improved. Now, there is one important exception. If someone already has chronic kidney disease, their doctor may recommend lowering protein intake to reduce strain. That's a medical condition that requires personalized care. But that advice has been mistakenly applied to everyone, including healthy adults and teenagers. That's how myths spread. A guideline for the sick becomes a fear for the healthy. The fundamental insight here is that your kidneys are resilient. They were designed to adapt, just like your muscles and your heart. For healthy people, eating more protein doesn't damage them. It simply makes them work a little harder for a moment, and then they recover. The greater risk is not from protein, but from losing muscle and gaining fat because you avoided it. So if protein isn't secretly destroying your kidneys, what about your bones? For years, we've been told that protein makes them weaker. Is that true, or is it another myth ready to be challenged? That's precisely what we'll uncover in Part 4. Bones and protein, enemy or ally? Another myth that has lingered for decades is that protein somehow weakens your bones. The story usually goes like this. Protein is made up of amino acids. Acids leach calcium from the bones, and therefore, eating more protein must lead to bone loss or osteoporosis. On the surface, it sounds logical, and for years it was repeated in classrooms, magazines, and even medical offices. But just because something sounds logical doesn't make it accurate. The body is more complex than a simple acid in, bone out equation. Here's what really happens. When you eat protein, yes, it produces acidic byproducts. But your body isn't defenseless. The gut buffers the food you eat, and your blood tightly regulates its own pH. In fact, protein provides the very building blocks that bone cells need to grow. Inside your skeleton are specialized cells called osteoblasts, the builders that lay down new bone. Protein actually fuels their activity. So instead of protein draining your bones, it often does the opposite. It supports them. The research here is striking. Extensive population studies that followed hundreds of thousands of people over decades found no evidence that protein harms bone density. In fact, higher protein intake was linked to stronger bones, especially when paired with calcium and vitamin D. One study even showed that older adults who ate more protein had fewer fractures and maintained bone mass better than those who avoided it. That's a direct contradiction to the old myth. I think of a woman I once counseled, 55 years old, recently diagnosed with early osteoporosis. Her mother had broken a hip in her 70s, and she wanted to avoid the same fate. At first, she thought the answer was to cut back on meat and dairy because of what she had read online. Instead, I encouraged her to do the opposite. Keep protein steady, add calcium-rich foods, and start light resistance training. Within a year, her bone density had stabilized, and she felt stronger carrying groceries and climbing stairs. Protein wasn't an enemy for her. It was part of the solution. The lesson here is empowering. If you're over 40, you don't need to fear that protein will steal strength from your bones. On the contrary, protein can be one of the best allies you have to protect your skeleton as you age. Think of it this way. Every time you eat protein, you're fueling your muscles and giving your bones the raw material they need to stay solid and resilient. And when combined with exercise and proper nutrients, you're actively building a stronger frame to carry you through the decades ahead. So if protein doesn't secretly erode your bones, what about its connection to blood sugar and diabetes? Many people have heard that high protein intake raises the risk of type 2 diabetes. Is there any truth? Or is it another case of mistaken blame?
If kidney damage and bone loss are the first two big fears about protein, then diabetes often comes third. Many people believe that eating more protein increases the risk of type 2 diabetes or worsens blood sugar control. And at first glance, the research can look confusing. Some observational studies, the kind that follow people over years and track their eating habits, show a connection between higher protein intake and higher rates of diabetes. But here's the key. Those studies don't prove cause and effect. They only show patterns, which can be misleading when other factors hide in the background. Let me give you an example. Imagine two groups. One group is lean, active, and eats balanced meals, while the other is overweight, more sedentary, and tends to consume more calories overall. That second group often eats more protein too, simply because they eat more of everything: burgers, fries, dessert, and steak. When researchers look at the data, it can seem like the people who eat more protein have more diabetes, when in reality, it's not the protein driving the disease. It's the excess calories, the extra weight, and the lack of physical activity. Here's where intervention trials, the gold standard of nutrition science, tell a different story. Scientists take two similar groups of people and carefully control what they eat. When one group eats more protein but the same total calories, their blood sugar control improves. They feel fuller, lose more fat, and keep more muscle. For people already struggling with prediabetes or type 2 diabetes, that's a huge advantage. Protein slows digestion, helps prevent sharp spikes in blood sugar, and supports lean tissue that acts like a sponge for glucose. Far from being a risk factor, protein can be part of the solution. I think of a 60-year-old man I worked with who was newly diagnosed with prediabetes. His breakfast was pancakes and syrup with orange juice. By mid-morning, his blood sugar had dropped alarmingly, and he reached for a donut in the office. We advised him to swap the pancakes for eggs and Greek yogurt. Within a few weeks, his energy was stable, his cravings were gone, and his blood sugar improved. The difference wasn't in the medication, it was in the protein. The insight here is liberating. If you feared that protein might push you toward diabetes, the evidence shows the opposite. When paired with balanced eating and portion control, protein helps steady your metabolism and makes it easier to manage weight, the #1 factor driving diabetes risk in the first place. In other words, protein doesn't fuel the fire of diabetes, it helps put it out. So far, we've seen that protein doesn't destroy kidneys, doesn't weaken bones, and doesn't worsen diabetes. But what about the biggest fear? The idea that eating more protein might actually shorten your life. That's the question we'll tackle in Part 6, Longevity and the Protein Paradox. Now we arrive at the biggest fear of them all. The idea that eating more protein could actually shorten your life.
This belief comes from fascinating research in animals, especially rodents. Scientists discovered that when mice were fed high-protein diets, specific cellular pathways, like mTOR, became more active. Because overactivation of these pathways is linked to faster aging in lab animals, some researchers wondered, could the same thing happen in humans? The thought was unsettling, and soon headlines appeared, warning that protein might age you faster or cut years off your life. That message struck a nerve for people over 40, already worried about getting older. But here's the reality. What happens in mice doesn't always occur in humans. Our bodies are far more complex and live decades longer than any lab rodent. The story was very different when scientists looked at real people throughout their lives. Extensive studies following thousands of adults found no evidence that higher protein intakes led to shorter lifespans. In fact, the opposite pattern often appeared in older adults. Those who ate more protein tended to live longer and healthier lives, mainly because they preserved more muscle and avoided frailty. I'll share a picture from my own practice.
Two men in their early 70s came to see me within the same year. One man has spent the last 10 years cutting back on protein because he fears it will damage his kidneys and shorten his life. He is skinny and weak and can barely get up from his chair in my office. The other man focuses on getting protein at every meal and doing light resistance training twice a week. He is no bodybuilder, but he has strong legs, good balance, and still mows the lawn. Both men had the same chronological age, but their biological age, how their bodies functioned, was worlds apart. Which one do you think had the better odds of living longer and with a better quality of life? The lesson here is that longevity isn't just about adding years to your life. It's about adding life to your years. Protein plays a central role in that. It helps preserve muscle, a protective reserve for your entire body. It enables you to stay mobile, resist falls, recover from illness, and maintain independence. Instead of speeding up the clock, protein helps slow down the decline that robs many people of vitality in their 60s and 70s. So if you've been holding back on protein because of fears about aging faster, it's time to see the bigger picture. The real risk is not from eating protein, but from losing the muscle and resilience that protein helps you maintain. In other words, the paradox disappears. Protein isn't the thief of longevity. It's the partner that enables you to live longer and better. Now that we've cleared up the major myths around kidneys, bones, diabetes, and lifespan, the next question is practical. How much protein do you need after 40, and how can you get it
without overthinking or stressing? That's precisely what we'll cover in Part 7. How much protein do you need after 40? By now you might think, okay, I get it. Protein isn't the villain I thought it was. But how much do I actually need at my age? That's a smart question because the answer is different for a 25-year-old bodybuilder and someone in their 50s or 60s simply trying to stay healthy, lose a little belly fat, and protect their muscles. The simple truth is this. Our bodies become less efficient at using protein as we age. It's called anabolic resistance. That means the amount of protein that once built muscle easily in your 20s may not have the same effect in your 50s. Older adults need a bit more protein, not less, to overcome that. So what's the right range? Most experts agree that somewhere between 1.2 and 1.6 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight per day is ideal for people over 40. In plain English, weighing about 150 pounds is roughly 80 to 110 grams of protein a day. Not hundreds and hundreds of grams, not bodybuilder levels, just enough to keep your body strong and resilient. If you're more active or working on losing weight while holding on to muscle, going a little higher, up to 1.8 grams per kilogram, can be helpful. Now, what does that look like on your plate? Let me make it real. 2 scrambled eggs give you about 12 grams. A cup of Greek yogurt, another 15. A palm-sized portion of chicken breast or salmon, around 25 to 30. A protein shake, about 20. Put that together and you can easily reach your daily target without eating mountains of food. A woman I worked with, 65 years old, used to start her day with toast and jam. She felt hungry an hour later. When she switched to 2 eggs with spinach and a scoop of Greek yogurt on the side, not only did she get 25 grams of protein before 9 a.m., but she stayed full until lunch. That small change helped her cut out the mid-morning snack that kept her weight stuck. The key isn't just hitting a number, it's spreading your protein out. Studies show that having 25 to 35 grams of protein at each meal works better than cramming it all in at dinner. It keeps your muscles supplied throughout the day and helps control appetite. Think of protein as the anchor of every meal. Once you've got it, you can build the rest of your plate around it with vegetables, whole grains, and healthy fats. The insight here is simple but powerful. Eating enough protein after 40 isn't about chasing extreme numbers, but consistency. Give your body the steady supply it needs, and it will reward you with more energy, better weight control, and stronger muscles and bones. So now that you know how much protein you need, the next question is, how do you use it as a practical tool for weight loss, especially when belly fat feels so stubborn after 40? That's precisely where we're headed in Part 8. Protein as a tool for weight loss and belly fat reduction.
Protein as a tool for weight loss and belly fat reduction.
By this point, you might be asking, if protein is safe and necessary, how does it help me lose weight? Especially this stubborn belly fat that seems to grow faster after 40. The answer comes down to 3 powerful ways protein works. It keeps you full, protects your muscle while you're losing fat, and supports your metabolism. When you cut calories to lose weight, your body naturally wants to burn fat and muscle. That's why so many people lose weight but don't have a flat stomach, and they feel weaker than before. By giving your muscles the raw materials they need, protein signals your body to hold on to lean tissue while focusing on fat. The result? You lose the weight you really want. Compared to carbs or fats, protein triggers hormones that tell your brain you're satisfied. That's why a breakfast of eggs and yogurt can keep you full for hours, while a bowl of cereal leaves you reaching for a snack by mid-morning. For people over 40, this effect is even more valuable. Hormonal changes, slower metabolism, and stress often make appetite harder to control. Adding protein to each meal can be the simplest tool to calm cravings without relying on willpower alone. I worked with a woman in her early 50s who had tried every diet you can imagine. She cut carbs, skipped meals, and tried liquid cleanses. Each time she lost weight quickly, but it always came back, and usually with more belly fat. Everything changed when we shifted her focus to protein, making sure she had 25 to 30 grams at each meal. She didn't feel starved. Her energy was steady. Over 6 months, she lost nearly 20 pounds. But the most dramatic change was in her waistline. She dropped 3 pant sizes, and her doctor congratulated her on lowering her blood sugar and blood pressure for the first time in years. The beauty of protein is that it doesn't require extreme dieting. It's not about cutting out everything you love. It's about anchoring your meals so you feel satisfied and naturally eat less of the foods that push weight gain. Swap the bagel for an omelet at breakfast. Replace chips with Greek yogurt and berries for a snack. Choose grilled chicken or salmon instead of a giant plate of pasta for dinner. Small swaps like these add up. Over time, they tilt the scale in your favor without leaving you miserable. The more profound lesson is that losing belly fat after 40 isn't just about eating less. It's about eating smarter. Protein helps you preserve the part of your body that keeps you young, your muscle, while making it easier to let go of the fat that holds you back. It's not a punishment. It's a gift to your future self. We've covered a lot of ground. We've taken apart the most common fears, that protein ruins your kidneys, weakens your bones, fuels diabetes, and even shortens your life. And we've seen how those fears, sounding convincing initially, don't hold up when tested against decades of research in real people. What emerges instead is a very different story. Protein isn't the villain of midlife health. It's one of your strongest allies. Think of what we now know. Your kidneys are built to adapt. Just as your heart beats faster when you climb a hill, your kidneys work a little more complicated when you eat more protein, and then return to normal. Your bones, far from being drained, are supported by protein, giving them the raw materials they need to stay strong. For blood sugar and diabetes, protein isn't the danger. Excess calories and weight are. And when calories are managed, protein helps smooth out blood sugar swings and reduce cravings. Even the fear about longevity doesn't hold up. In fact, people who protect their muscles with adequate protein as they age tend to live not only longer, but with more independence and vitality. So what does this mean for you, sitting here today, in your 40s, 50s, or 60s, worried about your waistline or future health?
It means that protein can be your partner in aging well. Imagine starting each morning with a breakfast that keeps you full until lunch. Imagine feeling strong enough to carry your groceries, bend to play with your grandkids, or take a long walk without fatigue. These aren't small wins, but the building blocks of a longer, healthier life. And protein is right at the center. One of my patients, a 67-year-old grandfather, told me recently, "I thought cutting protein would save my health. Instead, adding it back gave me my life." With minor changes, swapping his pastry breakfast for eggs and yogurt, choosing chicken or fish at lunch instead of skipping protein, and keeping a shake after his light workouts, he lost weight and regained the energy to coach his grandson's baseball team. That's the kind of transformation that numbers on a lab test can't capture, but it's what truly matters. The lesson here is clear. Protein is not something to fear. It's something to embrace, consistently and wisely, as part of a balanced diet. Anchor each meal with it, spread it evenly through the day, and pair it with colorful plants, healthy fats, and movement. Do that, and you'll be stacking the deck to favor health, strength, and vitality for years. And as we close, remember this. It's not about chasing perfection or extreme diets. It's about giving your body what it truly needs. So tomorrow morning, try one slight shift. Add a real source of protein to your breakfast. See how you feel. That simple step could be the start of a whole new chapter. In our following conversation, I'll show you how to recognize the 5 warning signs that you might not be getting enough protein.
What to do about it.
Thanks for being here. Your health is the foundation for everything you do. Protect it. If you found value in today's video, tap like, share it with someone who needs encouragement, and subscribe for more. We're here to guide you through the science, the facts, and the tools to win your fight against obesity.